In this video, we're going to build our first real feature for our TurboRails clone, and this feature will be the TurboFrameTag helper. So what we want to achieve here is that when clicking on the edit button for a specific article here, what we don't want to do is to navigate to another page. Instead, we would like just to extract the form and replace this specific portion of the page. So we could perfectly achieve this without a TurboFrameTag helper, and actually that's what we're going to do first. So we could do it by wrapping each article here within a TurboFrameTag of with the ID, with a specific ID. And by convention in the TurboRails library, this ID is the DOM ID of the article. So let's do this and go to the partial for one article. And what we could do is to create manually the HTML element like this. And we could specify also the ID manually. So we could say that the DOM ID here is the DOM ID of the article. And if we refresh the page and inspect the DOM, we can see that we succeeded, right? So we have a TurboFrame with an ID of each specific article here. In order for it to work, we have to wrap this form here within a TurboFrame with the same ID. So that's what we're going to do. When we go to the edit page, we can say that we want a TurboFrame element to wrap our form, and the ID of this TurboFrame will be equal to the DOM ID of the article. So now when I inspect the DOM here, I can see that I have a TurboFrame with the ID equal to the DOM ID of the article. So if I click on the edit button, only the form is getting replaced. So this is what we wanted, but it's kind of annoying to have to pass the to create the DOM ID manually every time. What we would like is to create a convention to always use the DOM ID, and we can do this by creating a TurboFrameTag helper that will do this for us. So in order to create a helper, I'm going to go on the app helpers turbo clone, and I'm going to create a frames helper here. If we have a look at the application helper, it contains nothing and we're not going to use it, so we can safely delete it. What we want is to have a clear name for our helper, so we're going to name it frames helper, and we are going to namespace it within the turbo clone module. This is something that is always true. Our engine is an isolated engine, so by default everything is namespaced within a TurboClone module, so jobs, mailers, everything. And this is a convention that we will keep in order to avoid naming conflicts. So within this helper here, we can create our TurboFrameTag helper, and this TurboFrameTag helper will take a resource and a block. And what we're going to say is that the ID that we want depends on if the resource responds to the toKey method. If it responds to toKey method, then we're going to convert it to a DOM ID, and otherwise we will keep it unchanged. So this should work. We are going to rely on the tag method to generate our TurboFrame HTML element, and we're going to pass it the ID that we just computed and the block. So this should work, and we are going to try to replace what we did previously with our turbo frame tag helper. So in our case here it's article, and the block is the HTML that we had previously. And we're going to do exactly the same here, turbo frame tag article, and the content of the block is the content of the form. So let's try it, and when we refresh the page here, we are going to see that the turbo frame tag helper is undefined. And this is because we are in an isolated engine. If we have a look at the documentation for isolated engines helpers, we are going to see that by default, the helpers are not included in the main Rails application, so in our case the Rails dummy application, and that if we want to include helpers within the main application, we can specify them individually like this, or we can use this helpers method on the engine to include directly all the helpers. So what we're going to do is to rely on this method here, but we are not going to include it this way in application controller. Instead, we are going to rely on the engine class. And as mentioned earlier, the engine class is really an important class. It is the glue between all the different parts of Rails and all the different extensions that you're going to include inside your main Rails application. And actually, in the engine class, you have the initializer method that is used to create initializers just like you would create in your main Rails application. So what you do is you give it a name, and that's not the really important part here. So the name is only a description. It has no real purpose to my knowledge. But what is really interesting is that we can use the active support onload hook, and we can say that when action controller base is loaded, what we want to do is to execute this method within it. So in our case here, it's not my engine, it's TurboClone. But apart from this, this hook here is something that we will use very often in this tutorial, because it is used to extend the capabilities from the main Rails application. So in our case, we say that when action control base is loaded, we want to use this method to include the helpers. So if I refresh the page, it still doesn't work, because as we created an initializer, we have to restart the Rails server. So once the Rails server is restarted, we can see that we have the exact same HTML as we had before, and when I click on the edit link, it works as expected. So before we leave to the next video, we're going to do two things. We're going to apply the same behavior when clicking on the new article link, and we will also compare what we have in the Turbo Frame helper with what we have in the real library. So let's very quickly go on the new page and wrap the form in a Turbo Frame tag with the article. So once we navigate to the new article page now, we have the form that is wrapped inside the Turbo Frame with ID new article. And now what we want is that when we click on the link here, we want to append the article form, the new article form, just below the link here. So to do this, we are going to go to the index page, and we are going to create an empty Turbo Frame with the ID of new article. So when I inspect the DOM here, I can see that I have an empty Turbo Frame with the ID of new article. And what we are going to say is that when we click on the new article link, we want to drive the Turbo Frame with the ID of new article. So let's inspect DOM once again, what we can see is that the link here drives the turbo frame new article, that is the empty turbo frame right below. So now when I click on the new article link, the form appears right below. So that's it for what we're going to build in this video, but I would just like to take time to compare the turbo frame tag that we have with the real turbo frame tag from the source code. As of today, the frames helper from the real source code is within the app helper's turbo and in the frames helper. So we have this exact same namespace here, and in this helper, in this module, we have just one method, and this method is the turbo frame tag. In the reality, it takes a little bit more of arguments, but we're going to break that down. So the real turbo frame tag, it can take multiple resources, and what it will do is it will try to convert them in a DOM ID if they respond to toKey. So we will map on all those resources and try to convert them into a DOM ID, and then we will join the result with an underscore. So that's what it does for the ID. It can also take an SRC argument. So the SRC argument is for lazy loaded frames. For example, if we were to pass SRC article, then the article would be converted in localhost /articles / the ID of the article. And then we use the tag.turboframe, and we pass as arguments the ID, the SRC, and the target. We use compact here because some of those attributes can be nil. And the attributes here can be like class names or data attributes, or really any kind of attributes that you want to appear on the TurboFrame HTML element. And we also pass the block, and here we go. This is the real TurboFrame tag. And we are not going to build it in our tutorial because we're not going to use lazy loaded frames. And we're not going to add class names or drive other targets or things like that, but this is the real one. It's a bit more complex, but ours will enable us to do everything that we want for our clone. And in the next video, we will learn how to write tests for helpers.